Hello, everybody. I know that you've taken time out of your day to tune in for today's webinar, and I'm grateful that you did. I think you're going to get some really good information out of today. It's titled, What Should I Do with My Old 401k? And we have two amazing rock stars on my team. Harmony Wagner, who's a CFP, one of our wealth advisors, and Samantha Macy, who's also an advisor and soon to be a CFP, certified financial planner. And they're going to go through exactly what you should do with your old pension plans. And you can't believe just how often people go and they change jobs, and they change jobs more than once, and they forget about old pension plans. So without any further ado, I'd like to hand off the presentation to Harmony and Samantha. And after they go through what you should do with your 401k, I'd like to come back and talk a little bit about the markets. I'm guessing that you may want to hear what I have to say and my thoughts. So there you go. Harmony and Sam, take her away.
All right. Thank you, Steve. Hello, everyone. I'm Samantha Macy, one of the Associate Wealth Advisors here at Boucher Financial Group. So today we're going to be talking about what should I do with my old 401k. We'll be discussing 401k options in retirement, pros of rolling over your 401k to an IRA, frequently asked questions, and learning a little bit about in-service distributions. So today we thought we would start off by going over the options for what you can do with your old 401k. And you can see here we have 3 options listed out for you. And I'm going to be going through the circumstances in which each of these might be the right choice for you. So option number 1, keeping your 401k with your previous employer. Now, in general, we wouldn't recommend this course of action, but there is a circumstance where this could make sense for you. And this is if you can take advantage of the rule of 55 and you need access to these funds immediately in retirement. Now, in general, if you take funds from your 401k or IRA before 59 and a half, you will incur a 10% early withdrawal penalty. But the rule of 55 allows penalty-free 401k withdrawals for workers who leave a job between the ages of 55 and 59 and a half. So in other words, you would have access to these funds at an earlier age without having that 10% penalty applied to you. Now, if you don't need access to these funds at that earlier age, what we would recommend is to keep that money invested and working for you. Your second option would be to cash out of your 401k plan. This would make sense if your account is very small and you're 59 and a half or older to avoid that penalty I was just talking about. When I say a small account, in general, I mean approximately $10,000 or less, and there's a reason for that. So one thing for you to know is that even if you're older than 59 and a half, you will have to pay ordinary income tax on cashing out of that account. If it is a small amount, it's unlikely you will be pushed into the next tax bracket, but if it was larger, that's something that we would want to keep an eye on. And third, your last option here we have for you is to roll your 401k into an IRA, or you can see right here down below, or your current 401k. Now, some plans do allow for this, that you could go to your previous plan and roll it into your current one. It really just depends on your 401k document. You'd want to check and see if that is something that you can do. Now, there are a number of advantages to rolling your 401k into an IRA. And if we look over here to this graphic on the right, you can see we have 5 main benefits for you. So let's walk through them. The first one is direct control over your retirement plan. What I'm talking about here is if you leave your plan at a previous employer, oftentimes you'll have to contact that employer to access your funds. With an IRA, you would have easier access of your funds and easier management of it. Number 2, more investment options. In general, 401ks have very limited investment options that you can choose to be invested in for the life of your 401k plan. With an IRA, you have a much broader selection, which can allow you to have a more tactical approach with how you're invested over the long term. Number 3, and this kind of goes hand in hand with number 2, poor performance of your 401k. Now, I'm not going to speak to your performance of your previous plan or your current plan, but in general, we see higher performance in IRAs than we would in your 401k. And this is again because of a wider selection of investment options to you. And oftentimes, IRAs are professionally managed, which allows for more tactical and strategic investments over time. Number 4, escaping high fees. Many people do not realize how many fees are associated with your 401k plan, whether it's a service fee, management fee, or investment fees associated with them. An IRA decreases those fees, and we're going to go into that in detail later in this presentation. Lastly, consolidation of accounts. Many of us will have several jobs over our careers and might have 1, 2, 5 previous 401k plans, and it really is a benefit to consolidate them into one account. This allows for easier access, management, and also making sure that your IRA would be allocated in the way that's best suited for you. So I'm going to hand it off to Harmony next, who's going to be talking about investments.
Thank you, Sam. Sam did a great job giving an overview of some of the reasons why you might consider rolling a 401k at a previous employer to an IRA. And as she alluded to, one of the most pressing or most compelling arguments is the investments and how those options affect your potential performance. Anyone who's ever tried to make an investment selection in their 401k has probably noticed that the list of available investments is somewhat limited. The typical 401k plan offers 25 funds, which you can choose from. They may be target date funds, they may be more sector-based or risk-based funds. And having limited options like this can be a relief to the average 401k participant, particularly someone who may be starting out, just starting to contribute to a 401k for the first time, so the balance is relatively small. And someone who isn't in the industry and doesn't have the time, interest, or knowledge, or any combination of those three things to build a portfolio on their own from a large selection of investment options. So this oversimplification of fund offerings is not innately bad. In fact, it serves an important purpose for people who are managing their 401ks themselves, which we'll talk about in a moment. But it's generally preferable to have your assets managed more tactically by a professional advisor who knows what they're doing, who is spending the time, has the knowledge and expertise to make good tactical decisions. With an IRA, instead of having just a few options you can choose from, you have access to thousands of investment options, particularly if your IRA is held at one of the larger institutions such as Charles Schwab, Fidelity, Vanguard, TD Ameritrade, where you have access to many, many different options from mutual funds, ETFs, individual stocks, whatever you can imagine you can hold in an IRA, which is quite the stark contrast to a 401k's options. This is especially important in the later years of one's career or after you've been with a certain job for a long time and your balance in that 401k account may be larger and they represent a larger percentage of your overall wealth, specifically the wealth that you have accumulated for the purpose of your retirement. At that point, the stakes are much higher to have that invested tactically and being managed professionally. With the 401k plan, on a similar note, there are also limited funds per sector. So even if you do have the know-how and interest to build your own portfolio and your own model from the funds available, let's say, for example, you want to invest a portion of your account in large cap growth. Well, odds are that you're only going to have 1, maybe 2, maybe 3, if you have a good plan, options for funds in that particular sector that you desire. And the same goes for many sectors, particularly for bonds. Actually, I was reading an article the other day that said that the average 401k only has 3 bond funds to choose from in total. So for people who are closer to retirement or who just have a more conservative nature and want to incorporate fixed income in their retirement savings on some level, you have very limited funds in a 401k plan. With an IRA, you have much more opportunity for increased diversification. So you have, instead of just 1, 2, or 3 large cap growth funds available to you, you probably have hundreds or maybe more. In addition, you can become even more tactical by selecting funds, ETFs, or having your advisor select those for you that target even more specific than just those higher level sector classifications. Finally, with the 401k plan, when it comes to the investments, the participant is responsible for management. You, as the account holder, are the one who is in charge of looking at that account, monitoring it, thinking about what's going on in the markets, what's going on in the economy, what do I see down the road, and making decisions accordingly. And for most people, that's not something that they are interested in doing on a daily basis. Whereas with an IRA, you have the opportunity to have a professional manager of your choice, as opposed to an advisor that might be assigned to a 401k plan. You can choose someone that you trust to be making those decisions and day-to-day monitoring of your account for you. So those are three kind of categories under the investments umbrella that can contribute to better performance over time in an IRA versus the 401k plan. Next, we're going to talk about fees. And if it surprises you that you're paying fees on your 401k assets, you're certainly not alone. A study in 2021 by the Government Accountability Office found that 41% of 401k participants had no idea they were paying fees on those assets. The average all-in annual fees for a 401k is 2.22%. And for a 25-year-old American employee earning the median salary, that annual fee would stack up to $138,000 in fees paid over their career. That's a very large amount. Imagine what you could do with an extra $138,000 when you retire. So to know ways that you can avoid these fees when it's possible can really help grow your portfolio over time. There are three categories of fees that apply to 401k assets. And the first is investment fees. And on some level, these are very hard to avoid, whether you're in a 401k or an IRA. These are the underlying expenses that go into being invested in funds, mutual funds, index funds, exchange traded funds. There are always expenses that are there for the management of those funds. And some of that can be hard to avoid no matter what type of account you're in. However, as we talked about the limited options with the 401k, you don't have the choice in a 401k to look for a more low-cost option that fits that same goal. So you will likely be paying higher investment fees. In addition, many 401ks may include funds that have a higher expense ratio than you could find when you have access to all the universe of investment options. The second category is plan administration fees. These are typically charged to participant accounts on a monthly, quarterly, or annual basis as a percentage of the assets that are in that account. And they apply to a number of different services that you receive when you're an active participant, meaning when you're still employed. They cover services such as making sure that your payroll deferrals get allocated to your account, making sure that all kinds of testing and regulatory measures are being observed. There's quite a variety of regulations and laws that govern 401k plans and how they have to be managed. So there is people who have to take care of that, monitor it, do the testing and things like that. So that is where this category of fees goes to. The third, I should say, is service fees. And these are typically fees that are only incurred when you take advantage of the service. So for example, if you call to take a distribution from a 401k account, you will likely be charged by that institution, maybe $50, $75, $100. When you move to an IRA, I'm not going to speak for everyone, but I know at our custodian, Charles Schwab, that the accounts that our firm manages, if you call for money from your IRA, you're not going to be getting a service fee for that. It's your money. You shouldn't really have to pay to access it. So these two second and third categories of fees here are fees that you can avoid by rolling assets out of the 401k plan. And particularly when you're no longer working, these plan administration fees are for services that as a former employee, not a current employee, you are no longer receiving any benefit, right? You're not making paycheck deferrals anymore. So you don't need someone monitoring that those are going through correctly. You're not benefiting from the plan being run and being tested and all that stuff anymore once you're not in it. So those are two fees that you can avoid by rolling the assets out of the 401k, and by reducing those potentially high fees over time, you can really reduce the drag on your performance and get that extra money going right to your retirement, right into your savings, as opposed to paying third parties for fees.
Thank you, Harmony. So we've gone over investments and fees. Now let's talk about consolidation. We have a couple best practices for you. And we know as you progress throughout your career, you may work for several different employers and have several different 401k plans throughout time. So a best practice for you is to roll over 401ks immediately after each transition. And by that we mean Right after you leave a job, start thinking about where that 401k should go. And our recommendation is into an IRA. So some benefits of doing this are that you would still have access to HR personnel that you worked with at that company. You would have their contact information and probably have a relationship with them, so you would know who to contact. Also, your login credentials would still be top of mind for your previous plan. We work with a lot of people, and sometimes they'll remember, oh, I had a 401k plan at this company 20 years ago, but it's hard to access because they've lost touch with the people that have worked there and they have forgotten their credentials to log into that plan. So to save yourself some time and stress, it's easier for everyone to streamline the process to do it immediately after you leave an employer. Another best practice for you is to minimize the number of accounts you need to personally manage. And that goes back to taking all of those previous 401k plans and consolidating them into one IRA account. It's easier to manage, and you can make sure that your funds are invested properly in that one account, and you'll have that professional management as Harmony was just discussing. So in an ideal scenario, we would each want to have one active 401k plan and one professionally managed IRA. So now I'm going to hand it back to Harmony, who's going to go over some frequently asked questions.
Thank you, Sam. Oftentimes when clients reach out to us and they maybe have a previous 401k or multiple, there's some questions that we get asked a lot about the process and things that you should know before considering this type of rollover. And the first one is, are there any taxes or fees involved in a 401k rollover? So rollovers from one qualified account to another are non-taxable events. So when you go from a 401k, which is typically a tax deferred, although it may be a Roth as well, where it'd be tax-free, and you roll it to an IRA for those pre-tax 401k dollars or a Roth IRA for Roth 401k dollars, those are going from one qualified account to another similar tax treatment qualified account. So those are non-taxable events. It's not considered a distribution. It's just the term is used as a rollover, and it will not cause you any taxes in that year. You preserve the tax preferential treatment. Now, as far as fees, some institutions, as I mentioned previously, do charge a rollover fee. It's typically $50 to $100. I haven't seen it be any more than that in my experience working with many rollovers. And it would be one time as long as you're rolling over that full balance in one shot. Where those fees can really stack up is when you leave it in a 401k and you want to take distributions in retirement, whether that's monthly or quarterly or annually, and you're starting to pay those fees on a more regular basis. That's where those can really stack up. But for a one-time, it's typically a pretty small amount. Another question that I've received is, I had this account, but if in a moment like we're in right now where the markets are down, is it a bad idea to do this kind of rollover right now? Should I wait for something different in the markets? Part of what a 401k rollover entails is that the assets will be liquidated at the institution where they are held, and they'll be sent as a check either to you at your address of record where you can then get it to your depositing institution, or they may sometimes be sent directly to that new institution. So there is a period of time where they're out of the market, but it's typically very brief. As long as all parties, whether that's you receiving the check or the other institutions, as long as they handle things in a timely manner, it's a typically very brief period, maybe 1 to 2 weeks. So I would say to someone who's concerned about rolling it over during a time that the markets are down is that it's as good a time as any. You're going to be out of the market for a little bit, that's unavoidable. But with it being such a small period, it's fairly unlikely that you'd sell out when your account is down and then have to buy in just a few days later with it much higher. So it's as good a time as any, and I wouldn't use the current environment or any future environment as a reason not to do it. In fact, as we mentioned, because there's better performance potential in an IRA, the best time to do it is today and not to wait. A final question is, what can I do with my 401k if I'm still working? So maybe you are aware of all these compelling reasons to move your 401k assets to an IRA. But for people who have made their careers at one company or a large portion of their careers at their current company, that may be a sizable balance that you may feel you can't access at this point. There may be an option for you, and that option would be called an in-service distribution. An in-service distribution is the process of rolling 401k assets out of your current employer's retirement plan to an IRA. Sometimes it is permitted and it really is plan dependent, but for those who do allow it, those plans that do allow it, it can really be the best of both worlds for participants. It allows someone who is still working for that company to continue contributing to the 401k. So you're able to add more of your income and shelter it from taxes and save for retirement in a larger amount. It's between 20,500 to 27,000, depending on your age, that you can put in a 401k, as opposed to 6 to 7,000, depending on your age, which you can add to an IRA. So that's a huge benefit of 401ks when you're still working for that company. And this strategy would allow you to keep contributing that higher amount to your 401k while moving the lion's share of those assets out to an IRA to be professionally and tactically managed and to take advantage of lower fees, to take it out of that umbrella where you're paying the plan administration and service fees and have it managed in a more tactical way. So it's really the best of both worlds. You still get your 401k that you can use for saving purposes, but you're kind of getting most of it to an IRA, which has some benefits as we've discussed at length. This is typically restricted to employees who have reached a certain age when it is available. 59.5 is a common one, but it could be lower or higher. And for some plans, there is no age restriction at all. So if this is something that you're considering doing, I would recommend reaching out to your HR personnel to see if this is allowed by your plan. And if so, then you can see what would be required to move forward. With that, I'm going to turn the presentation back to Steve for a review of the markets.
Great. Thank you, Harmony and Samantha. I think this was really good information. And if you know of anybody who, may be in a situation with some old pension plans at their old jobs or whatever, this will be going up on our website, which is a brand new website. And if you haven't seen it, you may want to go and visit it. But under the insights, what will it be under, Samantha? The blog portion?
The webinars and videos.
Webinars and videos. Thank you, Samantha.
Mm-hmm.
And as I said, our new website is pretty dynamic. Samantha was very involved in recreating this, and this presentation will be there. But let me just do a short market recap. As we know, volatility has returned, and it's just been, out of control. The emotions, I sent out a piece a week or so ago on capitulation and what it feels like. And I'm not sure we're there yet. The volatility stays with us. We had a great day yesterday. Today, as we're doing this webinar, we're not having such a great day. And we need to expect that will continue. But there will be a day when all of a sudden, the good days will outnumber the bad days. And we'll look back and we'll say, wow, that might have been a buying opportunity, just like 2 years ago during COVID. Remember how we felt when the market was down 34% in a few short weeks. We had the shortest recession in history on record. And, it was just, now we look back, it was like we can't even remember it. And this time will happen as well. Unfortunately, we had the headlines with Russia invading Ukraine and the poor good people of Ukraine just being, hurt so many ways, losing their homeland, their country being decimated. And let's hope that there's some good news coming out of that part of the world. And then we have inflation. And I haven't minced words. I felt that. And I've been public about this for a year or so ago, when the Federal Reserve Chair Jay Powell, the Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, and the White House administration all said that inflation was temporary, inflation was transitory. I didn't mince words. I said there's a few reasons why they feel it's not here, it's non-existent. And that's because they get driven around in car service, chauffeur-driven limousines. So they're not pumping their own gas. They don't see $20, $30, $40 a week more just because of the price of gas. They're not rolling around in the market 32 with their shopping cart full of groceries, spending an extra $50, $60, $70 a week for the same grocery cart full of groceries, and they're not paying their heating bills. So they're out of touch with reality, almost like they had their head in the sand. And I know I'm being critical, and I am being critical, because they were late to this party. They should have started raising interest rates last year. I keep using the analogy, inflation, getting it under control is like bringing a car to a stop. You kind of tap your foot on the brake so that the car slows down and comes to a nice gentle halt. That's really what the Fed was supposed to do. But now they're kind of slamming their foot on the brakes, or at least scaring us that they're going to be slamming their foot on the brakes. And they need to raise interest rates more aggressively because they were behind the eight ball. They're late to this party. Inflation is out of control, 40-year highs. This is all built into the stock market. There's no surprise. What the stock market doesn't like are surprises. So the stock market knows that all of these issues are out there. Now what we need is some good news. The good news about inflation, and even though I'm critical of the Fed for being late to the party, I know they're brilliant people and I'm rooting for them because it's up to them now to massage inflation and be able to manage the interest rate hikes in such a way that they bring the economy down for a soft landing. We don't want to go into a recession, and I'm hopeful that we may not go into a recession. There's 11 million jobs out there, 6 million unemployed people looking for jobs. Anybody who wants a job can have one. In a lot of recessions, there's no jobs. So I think that's that little silver lining and gives us a little hope that maybe we won't go into a recession, or if we do, maybe it won't be a deep recession. And because inflation is a moving target, every report that comes out, the Fed may not have to raise interest rates as aggressively. And we'll see as time goes on over the next several weeks and months, we'll see the reports coming out on inflation, the jobs reports, and so forth. And hopefully the Fed can bring us in, as I said, for a nice soft landing. And then all of a sudden, the markets will turn around. Remember, no matter what's happened in and around the world, in this great country of ours, the stock market has always recovered, always gone on to make new all-time highs. And it's going to be the same here as well. I don't have a crystal ball. I can just tell you that the market has recovered from every event that's ever come its way. And I don't think this is going to keep the market down. Think about it. The market hasn't, or I'm sorry, the world hasn't come to an end yet. I'm pretty sure it's not going to come to an end now. It just doesn't feel comfortable. And I'm stealing that line from Samantha Macy, who's on this call with us. She used it on the radio about 4 or 5 weeks ago, and I've been using it ever since. As she said, market corrections never feel comfortable, and she's right. This doesn't feel comfortable either, but we'll get through it. We made some changes in the portfolio that have benefited our portfolio. I think going a bit more defensive last week, adding healthcare, getting out of consumer discretionary and some other holdings, I think will be good. As you know, several months ago, we underweight bonds greatly and we underweight them again. Bonds, people usually add them to the portfolio to soften the volatility. Well, bonds are down 10% this year. I know that the stock market right now, the broad stock market is down about 16% and NASDAQ is down 25%. So, stocks are down more than bonds, but bond investors are feeling the negative impact of bonds coming off a 40-year rally. About 1981, the US 10-year Treasury yield was 16%. And there's an inverse relationship. When the yield comes down, the value of the bonds go up. So anybody who does any history seeking and looks at returns for bonds over the last 40 years, they look pretty good. So now that we know interest rates have bottomed out about 18 months ago, 20 months ago, the US 10-year Treasury note yield was about 0.5%. Today, as we sit here, it's every day it changes, but it's somewhere around 3%. And we know that interest rates are going to go up more. So bonds, I think, are in for rough haul, and we're, as I said, very underweight bonds. It was one of the good moves that we made in the portfolio that we feel good about. We'll get back into bonds as the volatility subsides. In the meantime, we're just being very careful about the bonds that we buy. So with all of that being said, if you have any questions at all pertaining to your portfolio, please reach out to us. Let us know if your tolerance for risk has changed or you're not sleeping at night. You know, a lot of people ask me, your phone must be ringing off the hook. And, you know, we all talk between ourselves, all of the team members that I have 16 very talented professionals that I'm surrounded by. And I ask them every Monday on our meeting, so how many calls have we gotten? And we get very few calls. And I think it's because we spend so much time coaching you, educating you, and really being there for you during times of volatility. So hopefully we'll continue to meet your expectations. I thank you for the trust you've placed in our services and our ability to manage your wealth. We'll continue to do that. And in the meantime, stay safe, stay healthy. Thank you for taking time out of your day to join us today. Goodbye for now.